Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast. Daily life in Cuba comes with a question mark these days. Will the lights stay on? Will there be food? And will there be fuel?
I used to be a driver. I used to drive a vintage car, but because of the petrol and oil situation, we had to find this alternative, a tricycle. There is no other way to keep the population moving.
For years, Venezuela was one of Cuba's go-to energy suppliers, but with oil shipments from that nation disrupted and Washington targeting countries that aid the island, Cuba is already on an edge, and that edge seems to be even sharper. Canadian airlines have suspended their commercial flights, as you've been hearing, which is a major blow to a country that relies heavily on Canadian tourism. Tara Mashka-Iyevich just returned from Veradero, Cuba. She is in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. Tara, good morning.
Good morning.
You have been to Cuba a number of times, right?
Yeah, I think about 8 or 9 at this point.
Okay. And what was it like this time? Did it seem different to you?
It definitely was a different experience. A lot less tourists, especially for this time of year. As we went through the week, the resort became increasingly emptier and emptier. And it just had I heard a number of folks from Canada that were on our, coming back with us on Monday night, talking about it. It felt eerie.
What felt eerie about it? What made it eerie?
Well, you go from Monday when we arrived. So we arrived on the 9th. It was packed at the pool, packed at the beach, restaurants, bars on the resort were full. And as we went through the week, you could walk through the pool area and there might be 3 people in the entire area. At the beach, very few people were going down at the end of the week. It felt empty.
Beyond the number of people who were there, what was life like at the hotel? Did you have the things that you would expect to find when you check into a resort?
Absolutely. We didn't experience any problems. Of course, again, we understand it's Veradero Tourist District. We didn't have any blackouts. We didn't have a lack of hot water. There was more than sufficient food for the tourists that were in. There didn't seem to be any lack of any of the necessities or luxuries, actually, I would say at this point, that we needed or wanted. One
of the things we've heard about, and I heard we mentioned this at the very beginning, is concerns around blackouts, concerns around gas for people to get around. Did you experience any of that? Were the lights on all the time?
So at Veradero, the lights were on, speaking to the staff, and we brought a number of solar-powered battery packs, banks, for folks, and they were extremely grateful and noted that they go 8 to 12 hours without power in their homes, and that it would be helpful to have these built-in power bank, flashlight type things to help them out. In Havana, we saw lineups, particularly at the banks, and the tour guide explained that when there's power and there's a deposit of money at the banks, then Cubans will line up to take out money, because if there's no power or the money runs out for the day, then they have to wait the next day, and they can be waiting up to 5 hours a day to try to get cash from the bank.
So you went into Havana. You left Veradero and went into Havana on a day trip, or?
We did. Yeah. It was a bit of touch and go. We had a tour guide we've used many times before, and he was having difficulties securing a vehicle for us to go from Veradero to Havana. The plan switched probably multiple times until he was able to secure a guide that had access to gas, or a driver, that had access to gas. And even then, when we were touring Havana, my partner asked, what's the driver doing? And he said, well, nothing, because he has no gas to go anywhere. No. He'll have to sit and wait for us to finish instead of, using his taxi, because he had to conserve the gas to get us back to Veradero.
Did you worry about running out of gas to get back to Veradero?
It was in the back of our mind for sure. The guide had reassured us that he had a backup plan, but one of the things is we usually drop medical supplies off at a clinic for not just tourists. And they really like you to go into the clinic, have the doctor sign for the supplies, take a picture so that, they can promote the not-for-profit. And in this case, the guide said to us, look, if you want to take this to a clinic like for children or women, we don't have the gas to do it, but I'll get it to the clinic and I'll send you the pictures, which he did eventually do early this week. He was able to get the supplies to a children's clinic.
What is it like for you as somebody who's been to the country a number of times to see it in the state that it's in right now?
It's really, I think, for a lot of folks that were there, that have been many more times than I heard the words heartbreaking. It was difficult on the last day to see these people that have worked so hard and taken care of us and treated us so well, knowing that they don't know when they're going to be back at work. Some of the resorts, people that go understand this, do like a farewell dance kind of thing, like from the entertainment team. When we were getting on the bus, they started playing the music and coming up, and the driver basically said, no, this isn't that day. And I was talking with him at one point, and he said, this is my last shift. I don't know when I'm going to work again. This is it for me today.
There are many Canadians who have kind of a special tie to Cuba because just of the scale of tourism and the number of people who go down to that island. Is your sense that you'll ever go back?
I hope so. You want to be a responsible tourist, right? Go with the intentions of sharing, leaving things better than, before you arrived. We've made friends down there. The tour guide, like I said, I've been to his mom's house. I've been to his sister's house. It's really heartbreaking. He has 2 small children and a wife. It's really difficult to know what that's going to look like for him and others in the future.
Tara, I'm really glad to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt.
Tara Mashkevich is a Canadian tourist who returned from Cuba earlier this week. We reached her in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. As the United States ramps up pressure and oil shipments vanish, Cubans, as you heard, are suffering, and the crisis is also testing that country's political leadership. Rory Nicol is the Guardian's correspondent in Cuba. We reached him in Havana. Rory, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt.
Can you just describe what Havana looks like this morning?
There is sort of differences. So I don't hear the cars running along the Malecon in the way that they normally do. That's Havana's famous corniche that runs along the city's front. Walking my little boy to kindergarten, he passed big piles of rubbish because the government can't afford to take away the trash. And, much of the city spends a great deal of time in blackout at the moment. So there's a strong sense of anxiety at the moment. We're beginning to feel the pinch now that week 2 of the embargo, the oil blockade.
You wrote about the fact that, Cuba has been through economic crises before, but in your words, this was the week that it got real. What have you seen change? You talked about that pinch. What is the pinch that's happening right now?
Well, the pinch is that the U.S. administration are playing quite smart on this in that they're just cutting off the oil, which is, the blood which keeps the whole country moving. So at the moment, there's no gas in the gas stations. People are beginning to try and find other ways around. They're starting to use bicycles. They're using electric cars are more prevalent. We used to think that was ridiculous to have electric cars here given the blackouts, but they're now one of the main ways around. Everything is shutting down. The schools have been reduced enormously. We heard yesterday that the main nickel mining company is shutting down operations. Obviously, the most shocking thing was when Canada pulled. All 3 airlines supplying the island with tourists pulled out on the same day. So this is the things we're seeing at the moment. These crises, trouble is it's a bit like a mugging. You start off as a sort of state of anxiety. You feel that something's not quite right, but then when it goes wrong, it'll go wrong very, very fast. At the moment, it's just everybody doesn't know how to get around. There's still food in the shops. There's still fruit and veg in the agrimercados. It's getting much more expensive, but at the moment we're sort of just on the edge, I'd say.
But the sense is that could change very quickly. I mean, one of the things you wrote about in the piece was somebody saying on Facebook, I'm getting married in March. I was just advised that the weddings for that month have been cancelled.
Yes, I mean, that's the thing, that at the moment people are just having their lives turned upside down by this. So, anything that happens in the state, office, like marriage is shut down. The problem is, and what really shocked me is, I live in quite a Cuban manner. I'm married to a Cuban. I have a half Cuban child. And so I was sort of lulled into this false sense of security that, the Cubans are amazing at adapting. They keep everything, they're already adapting to this situation. But then I spoke to a bunch of more than 5 ambassadors from across the world. And then I got a real sort of shaky moment because they're all preparing to pull out and they're preparing for a proper, real humanitarian crisis where people, could start dying. And I know that the World Food Programme is preparing itself for that as well.
How much of a hammer blow to the economy and it, perhaps as a precipitation to that leading up to that humanitarian crisis is the pullout of not just Canadian Airlines but other airlines as well when it comes to tourism? You're hearing about resorts not just being emptied, but some resorts closing down until maybe November or something like that. What does that mean for the broader economy?
It's huge. It's huge. I mean, tourism is one of the main ways they earn foreign currency. Canada is by far and away the biggest, as you've just pointed out with Tara. I'm a great lover of Canada. I spend a lot of time in Canada. I've been to every single province and territory, and my wife and I and child love Quebec and spend a lot of time in Quebec. And I can be in Bicêtre and meet the guy who's giving me hot chocolate, and he's been 30 times to Cuba. Canadians come all the time. At the moment, last year it was 750,000, but that is so reduced from the high point. And so the Canada pulling out is huge. Then the second one was Russia has pulled out. They're the third most common tourists. The second are Cuban exiles, people that have left the island and they're coming back. They are presumably still coming, but their numbers are enormously reduced as well. The rest of the airlines are refueling in the Dominican Republic or Mexico or wherever.
How has the government responded to this crisis? How is it explaining the crisis in some ways to the public?
It's very, very important to realize that Cuba has been in crisis for quite a long time, but particularly for the last 5 years. The government has been bankrupt for quite a long time. So the Cubans have been living in that issue for a long time. So now the government has come through with all these sort of policies. It's reduced the amount of, it's trying to preserve power for the hospitals. It's trying to keep sort of primary school kids in school. It's pushing forward measures, but it's more pain, and even more pain.
It's a tricky place to hear from actual Cubans about whether they're pleased with what the government line is, because dissidents have been jailed and are jailed in that country. It's a repressive government in many ways. But are people speaking out now because the situation is so dire?
Occasionally, because people are so angry with the government here, the government is run by very old men. It's quite moribund. And it's made a lot of mistakes. And so it's very easy. But then occasionally you have to step back and think, this is a completely unnecessary crisis. The US is literally strangling the country with oil. But then on the other hand, the government has run this country into the ground, essentially. I speak to a lot of Cubans, and I would say this with a great deal of belief. The vast majority, I would say more than 9 out of 10 Cubans, don't care who is to blame anymore. They just want it to get better.
Is there just finally the sense that Cuba's traditional allies like Russia and China will push back on what the United States is doing? Is your sense that could unfold?
Well, I'm not holding my breath. They've just announced some flotilla, or it's actually not a flotilla. It's sort of they want every sort of like-minded groups want to come and bring humanitarian aid to Cuba in March. The president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, has sent 800 tons of aid. This is all very useful. But Tara herself, you just spoke to, she proves that every single tourist, nearly every tourist that arrives comes with something, comes with medicines. And this is all hugely appreciated. But None of this truly matters. Well, it might matter to someone on the ground, but it doesn't matter in the big picture. The only thing that will make a difference are tankers full of gas right now. You can just arrive with a suitcase full of money and people can buy the stuff they need in the corner store. But the thing that's causing the problem here is a lack of gas. So whether you will see those allies, China, Russia, Mexico, Algeria, any of those actually send a tanker, I doubt. I doubt, because they don't want to get head-to-head with US Marines landing on their decks of their tanker, because that's an international crisis beyond words.
Rory, good to speak with you about this. Thank you very much and take care.
Thanks very much.
Rory Nickel is the Guardian's correspondent in Cuba. We reached him in Havana. Ricardo Torres is a Cuban economist and research fellow at the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies at American University in Washington, D.C. Ricardo, good morning to you.
Morning.
You have described Cuba as facing, in your words, a double crisis. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so basically what I had in mind is when you look at Cuba, and I think one of the commentators referred to that before, Cuba has been in a big crisis for a long time already. And so internally, we have an economic model, I'd say. It doesn't work. It doesn't reward effort and stifles private initiative. And then on the other hand, the government itself has become very illegitimate in the eyes of many Cubans. So they've made many policy mistakes. They've refused to engage a meaningful reform program. Many Cuban economists and others have advocated for that for a long time. In practical terms, people, what they see is that this government has been incapable of dealing with the crisis and improving their lives. So they're unhappy. On the other hand, this is going on at a time when it seems that Cuba's support from Cuba from overseas is coming down. In part, you talked before about Cuba's allies. Well, they've also frustrated at Cuba's lack of movement when it comes to addressing its pressing problems. So it's like solutions must come from overseas, never from within. And that's wrong. I mean, it's simply wrong. They are fed up with that situation. And also, of course, now they have to deal with a very activist U.S. government that is trying to use this moment to advance its policy goals.
What do you think the United States thinks it can achieve in this moment? The New York Times is reporting this morning that last week a tanker full of Colombian fuel apparently was intercepted by the U.S. Coast Guard, something like 70 miles off the Cuban coast. What does Washington think it can achieve in this moment?
Well, it's pretty obvious from the statements and public declarations of this administration that they want to use the leverage they have and seize it at this moment when it seems like Cuba is at its weakest position in decades. They know that they have policy tools at their disposal. And so, they just, suspended oil shipments from Venezuela. And they're doing that campaign in terms of, discouraging other countries or firms, for that matter, to send oil to Cuba. And so, the end goal, I think, is pretty clear. How to get there is what's been discussed. But the end goal is to produce regime change in Cuba, one way or the other.
Axios is reporting that the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has been holding secret talks with Raul Guillermo Rodriguez Castro, who is the grandson of Raul Castro. What do you make of that? What would the goal of those sorts of talks be?
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't want to say that I can confirm that. It's been reported, it's widely discussed in public media, but I cannot confirm that. Nevertheless, it's not that important. I mean, the what they've said very clearly as well is that they want a negotiation to take place with the Cuban government. with the relevant person in the Cuban government, and so that's the preferred course of action. If we look at what happened in Venezuela, so it's quite clear to me that they also value stability. So it's not only about producing.
They're looking for a Cuban Delcy Rodriguez in some ways, somebody who is associated with the government that they can have as kind of a leader with that leader taken out.
Well, yeah, you may put it that way, but the point again for me is that they also value stability, not just change. So the two things at the same time, so that it doesn't, whatever change takes place in Cuba doesn't create a big mess or chaos and then becomes a U.S. problem. And so, negotiations, it seems that that's the preferred course of action.
What do you think Cubans want? You hinted that the system of government right now isn't working. Do you think people still believe in the communist project in Cuba?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, we don't know that very well because Cubans haven't been asked that question directly in a long time. I do believe that most Cubans at this point want change. Obviously, it's not secret. You don't need to be an economist or a sociologist to understand that things are not working well for the majority of Cubans at this moment. And it's been like that for a long time. I think most Cubans also value some of the propositions, the original propositions of the revolution, like social justice, equality, public services, things like that. And I also value those. But the reality is that if a country has an economy that doesn't work, that doesn't deliver, those social promises are empty, as we are seeing right now in Cuba. So a system that delivers both, I think that's what Cubans want. And also, participating in political life actively without restrictions of any sort.
We're almost out of time. We just have a couple of minutes left. Let me ask you two quick things. One is, what do you think Canada owes Cuba? There are close ties because of tourism, but the connections that people have built with that country. What do you think a country like Canada owes Cuba?
Certainly any gesture that can express, some sort of closeness as friends. So we're here for you. We want to, provide some relief and something like that. Well, that's always going to be welcome. But, for a country, it's never enough, that type of gestures.
Very briefly, if you were to look ahead a year from now, what do you hope to see in Cuba?
Yeah, well, I think I'd like to see change that can deliver tangible improvements to people's lives. That's what I want to see. And people, as I said, also the ability for people to participate in decision making in political life.
That change has to be led by the Cubans themselves.
Yes. Hopefully that is gonna be the case, and I think that's the desire of most Cubans. Even if they want change, they want that change to be driven by, from within, not from the outside.
Yeah, we'll be watching. It is an important story. Ricardo, glad to have you here as part of this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ricardo Torres is a Cuban economist and research fellow at the Center for Latin American and Latino Studies at American University. We reached him in Washington, D.C. You've been listening to The Current Podcast. My name is Matt Galloway. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.